Hey guys, welcome back to a new video and welcome to my HTML crash course. As I already teased a little bit, that I will now cover web development topics here on my channel. And I decided to put all of HTML into this single video here because there is really not that much to it. This will be a little bit longer video here, but after that you really know everything you need to know to actually get started with HTML. So if you've never heard of HTML before, that just stands for Hypertext Markup Language. That is not a programming language. That is a common misconception. Instead, that is just a language, a markup language that we use to describe the structure of a website. And here you can see this is my website. You can choose any website you like. But if you are in Google Chrome and right-click, go to Inspect, and then this window will open up. Maybe there's a little bottom bar that opens up for you. But in the end, in this window, you can see this is HTML. And if we hover over these lines of code here, over these elements, then you can see Google Chrome will also highlight these in our browser. So in the end, what HTML does here is it is not responsible for how this website looks like. Instead, it just defines the structure. So it defines which elements we have at which positions, basically. So, okay, here we have an image, here we have a title text, here we have a slightly smaller text, here we have some more images, some paragraphs, and so on. So that is HTML. And you can also see when we hover over these, it's basically all put together into these containers. So those actually help us to structure our website, these so-called divs. But I will get to this in this course later. And I will just show you how you can use these elements and put them together to actually make a website with a good structure. So I will close this window again. And what I need you to do now, if you haven't already done this, is to download Visual Studio Code. This is the code editor that we will use, the editor in which we will put our code, our HTML code. It just comes with a lot of tools and features and installable plugins that make web development and development in general much more comfortable than if we would just use Notepad or so. So just go to code.visualstudio.com/download. I will put this link into this video's description and download this either for Windows or whatever platform you use. You also don't need to consider anything special at the installation. I assume if you watched this tutorial, you know how to install a program. So I will just skip this part to show you that and jump right into Visual Studio Code. So when you've installed Visual Studio Code, then probably this window will open up. Well, when you launch it, of course. And what we just want to do now here is we want to open a folder. So we just click on Open Folder and then go to the folder where we actually want to place our HTML files. Choose whatever you like here. I'm in HTML crash course here, and I will create another folder here called whatever website or so. And then I will choose this and click Select Folder. And then you can see Visual Studio Code opens, or rather loads this folder. You can see that it's empty, otherwise all the files inside of that folder would display here in this window. You could also collapse this if it fills up too much space for you. But we actually need this window now because inside of this folder we will now create our very first HTML file. So we click on this little plus icon and then we can create a new file called index.html. So the index file is just usually the file that really opens up at first on a website. We only have this single HTML file here for our website. But yeah, that is just the naming convention for the file that should open up at first. And then we can simply press Enter. And now you can see we're inside of our blank HTML file, which doesn't do anything right now. But since we're inside of Visual Studio Code here, it comes with a lot of cool shortcuts we can use to actually generate our basic structure of an HTML file. So what we can do here in Visual Studio Code is we can type doc for document and press Enter. And this will just generate the boilerplate code that is needed for every HTML file. So there's a lot of new stuff here at once for you, but don't worry, I will go through this general structure now and explain what these terms actually mean and what they are for. But before we do that, I actually want to install a very helpful extension here in Visual Studio Code, which is called Live Server. So what this will do is it will just set up a live local development server, which will allow us to just reload our website in the browser whenever we save this HTML file, whenever we save any file inside of this folder that affects our website. And that is just so useful for development that we don't always need to reload the page after we saved our files. So what we just want to do is we want to go to this plugins icon here, and then you want to search for Live Server. And this is the plugin you should install. Click on that, and I already have it installed. You need to click on install here, and then maybe it tells you to reload Visual Studio Code. Then you just do that. And after that, you're good to go. Then you can close this again. And I will switch back to this Files tab here. And just to show you that we can already display this HTML file as a website in our browser, we want to press Ctrl, Shift, and P. So we can enter a command here. And we want to type Live Server, which is the extension we just installed. And here we want to click Live Server, open with Live Server. And then it will launch this website, and you can see in Google Chrome, this is our blank website which doesn't have any content yet. So now whenever we save this HTML file here, then this page here will automatically reload. So that is what this Live Server extension does. So for example, you can see here in this head, we have this document text here, which is in between these title tags. So that is actually how we call these things inside of these angle brackets. These are tags. So each element in HTML, this would be an element, consists of an opening tag and a closing tag. So the closing tag just has this extra slash here. And in between these two tags, these opening and closing tags, we have some kind of content. So in this example, we have document, which is the title of our website. You can see that is just whatever is on this tab here, what is the title of our website. And if we change this, for example, to Hello World, hit Ctrl S to save it, then it will automatically reload here, and you can see the title now changed to Hello World. But let's go through this general structure a little bit more. So you already know what tags are now. You already know that we have an opening and a closing tag for each HTML element. So you can see here we also have this head element, which has an opening tag and a closing tag. And there are also some tags that don't need a closing tag, like this meta tag here. You can see we can immediately close this by just using this closing angle bracket. And the reason why not every element needs a closing tag is that not every element actually can have or should have content. So you can see when we have a title tag here, then we actually want to set the title to something. So we want to have some text in between. And here when we have this head tag, we actually want to define some other tags here inside of this head tag. So we also need an opening and closing tag to define these tags. But for example, this meta tag doesn't need that because it doesn't have any content. Instead, it has these kinds of attributes. That is what we call attributes in HTML here, where we just define inside of the first of the opening tag, we just define these, for example, char set, which is just the character set of our website. Those are just very default settings here that you really don't need to touch, but just that you get a general understanding for the structure of an HTML file. So for example, here for this meta tag here, we just refer to the viewport, so what is visible on the screen, and the content of that is set to width equal to device width. So the width of our website is just as wide as our device, as our monitor, and the initial scale is 1. So that's all what this defines here, and the rest is really not important to understand right now. Well, we define this document language here to English. You could also choose your language code here if you would make a website on your language. But I will just leave this as it is for now. What is especially important here on this HTML file is this body tag. You can see that is again an opening and a closing tag. And in between these two body tags, we can put the actual content of our website that should be visible to our users. So this head part here is actually not really visible. This doesn't contain any content except the title maybe, but that's also just visible in the tab bar here and not in the body of our website. So if we want to define some text, some images, some tables, whatever, we need to put this into this body here. And that is exactly what we will do now. I will show you the most common tags you actually use in HTML so that you can just structure your website in a good way with these and just display whatever you like on your website. But I want to start with actually not using any tag to also show you that this is possible. You can just put some text in between these tags here in HTML, just as we did with the title tag. So for example, just hello YouTube. And if we then hit Ctrl S to save it, and then we can see hello YouTube appears here on our website. And this will just have the standard formatting now, so it will always have the same font if you just put this into these tags without putting it into some kind of special tag that I will show you right afterwards. If you want to change these later, then you will need CSS, which I will actually show you in the next crash course, which is for styling a website, for making it look good. Because as you will see in this crash course, just using plain HTML, well, it can make a website, but these websites just look trash. Nobody would even visit that website because it looks so bad. Because as I said, HTML is just for the structure and not for the design of a website. But what we can do now is, let's switch back to this code tab. We can put this in between, let's say, an H1 tag. So we type H1, press enter, and that is just a shortcut to create the opening and closing tag. And if we then put this hello YouTube in between that and hit save, you can see suddenly it's a bold text and a lot bigger, because what H1 defines here is a headline. So H1 is actually the largest headline. We have H1 to H6, so we could also define H2, for example, hello YouTube, hit save. You can see that is another headline which is just a little bit smaller here, just a sub headline, and you have these H1, H2, H3 until H6. And these tags are actually not only useful to define headlines, or rather to define different sizes for headlines. Instead, these are also useful for search engines. So when Google, or rather Google spots, analyze your website, then it also helps for those to actually use these different kinds of headlines to show these bots how your website actually looks like, to better analyze your text and to better rank your website in search engines. So the next tag that is actually useful, I'll just delete this H2 here and swap out this content to HTML tutorial. The next tag I want to show you is the P tag. So we just type a P, press enter, and the P stands for paragraph. So the text that we put inside of this P tag should just represent a paragraph, just some lines that the user should be able to read, no headline or anything like that. So we could simply put in, I'm learning HTML from Philipp's crash course here. And if we hit save, then you can see this is just a normal text that is displayed here below our headline. And it's also important what we see here, that this paragraph actually shows up below this headline. So even though this headline actually only looks this wide, it fills up the whole screen's width. And because of that, there is not really space next to this headline. So what the browser will do is it will just put this paragraph in the next line. And this paragraph will also fill the whole width of our screen. So that is really important to understand, that this is the default behavior of the browser. Later with CSS, we have the options to just put these also next to each other to define how these behave when the screen gets smaller, how these look on mobile devices, and all that stuff. But just with plain HTML, usually these tags are just placed on top of each other. But there are also some tags, some kind of tags that work differently and that place these elements next to each other. And we will actually also see some of these tags in this crash course. Another tag that is sometimes useful is the BR tag, which stands for break, which is just a line break. And we could just, for example, put this in here, open this angle bracket, type BR. This doesn't need a closing tag because a line break doesn't have any contents, of course. And if we save this now, you can see now we have a line break here. So we can manually define these line breaks with these BR tags. And if we don't have these BR tags, then the lines will just be as wide as they can possibly be, which is in our case just the whole website's width. But later with CSS we can define a custom width so that these lines will actually auto wrap at exactly that width. And now what you've already seen when I showed you the source code of my website, the HTML code, are these so-called div tags. These are super common in web development, and these basically just define a container. So we can just use this div tag here and then just put these two elements inside of this div tag. And if we just hit save now, you can see this won't change anything in our document. But what these div tags are super useful for is just to group elements together. So this is just a single container here that contains all of these elements that we put in here. We could put in as many as we want here. And later this just helps us so much with designing, because all these elements are basically now treated as just one element if we use this div. So let's say we just want to right align both these elements, this h1 tag and the p tag, then we could later either apply the right align to each of those elements, or we put these in a container and then we just need to apply the right align to this single container, and all these elements inside of the container will also be right aligned. So the next thing I want to show you are lists. So how we can just use formatted lists with bullet points. I will define another div tag here. That's not necessary, but it's a good practice to just put multiple things together in a container. And here I will define an h2 here with, let's say, things to learn after HTML. And now we can list some things that we actually want to learn after we learned HTML. So you might think now there's a list tag. No, there is no list tag. Instead, this is called UL for unordered list. If we open this, then we can't just put these texts actually in here, like list item 1, list item 2. It doesn't work that way. Instead, if we have this unordered list here, then we need to put in so-called list items in between. So these are abbreviated with LI for list item. And in here we can now put in our list item text. So for example, we want to learn CSS afterwards. Then we can define another list item. We want to learn JavaScript. We want to learn, let's say, React, and all that stuff. And if we now hit Ctrl S, you can see this new container popped up here with a cool list of CSS, JavaScript, and React. And really, you can put in as many items as you want here in this UL tag. But there's not only a UL tag, so if there is an unordered list, there's also an ordered list. So we can simply swap this out with OL and make sure that it also renames this ending tag here, because I have an extension that automatically does that. I'm not sure if Visual Studio Code does that by default, but just make sure if you rename a tag, also rename the ending one. And if we now hit Ctrl S, you can see now it's an ordered list, which just starts with 1, then 2 and 3 and so on. So depending on your purpose, you can either choose an unordered list or an ordered list. All right, what do we have next? Of course, every website needs images. And therefore, in HTML, we have the so-called image tag. Just img and press enter, and you can see Visual Studio Code already comes with these two attributes when we open a new image tag. And you can also see that we don't need a closing tag for an image, because of course inside of an image is not really some kind of content, and the image itself will be defined in this source attribute here. So what I will do is I will open our files here, and I will just drag in a beautiful image from myself where I was diving. And you can just choose any image you like here. You don't need to have that exact image. And then we can simply use this source attribute here and specify Phil goes diving. And you can see the suggestion is already here. I will collapse this again. And by the way, this is, in this case, the relative path to the image. So you can see when I open this again, our HTML file is here in this folder, and the image is in the same folder. So we don't really need to specify a path here. If we would have a folder here, for example, for images, and we would drag in this image, then this wouldn't work, because then we would need to specify the folder. So image / Phil goes diving. And we also have this alt attribute here, which is just the alternative text, the description of the image, which won't be displayed by default. I think it will be displayed when the image can't be loaded, but it's also helpful for screen readers, so for blind people who actually want to read a website, or rather want to have someone who reads it to them, a screen reader, then it's helpful. And it's helpful for search engine optimization, so just to tell Google bots what is actually visible on your image, so that they can better rank your website. So in here we can just type Philipp is diving or whatever. And if we now hit save, you can see it is a huge image here on our website. So why is that? Well, for the exact reason I actually explained before, our elements fill the whole width of our website by default, and so will our image. And then it will just try to match the proportions of the image so that it will just fill the whole width, and then according to the proportions it will fill the remaining height of the image. But inside of image tags we can manually define a width. So we can specify a width attribute, and that is in pixels here, for example 300. If we hit save now, you can see the image got a lot smaller because we specified this width attribute here. And again here HTML or the browser will try to just keep the proportions of the image, just use 300 pixels as the width, and the rest will be the height, so that it just looks good. We can also specify a height here. It shouldn't format that actually. We can specify a height here of 100 pixels, for example, save this, and then you can see now, because we specify this height attribute, the proportions aren't met. So we want to remove that again. Next up we have tables, which we can define with the table attribute. We open this, and now we have some kind of different attributes that we can use inside of a table. On the one hand, that is TR, stands for table row. So inside of this table row tag, we can define all the columns of that specific row. And because this is the first row, we actually want to specify TH tags for table head, I think. Table header. It's just the heading of the corresponding row, or rather column. And here we could, for example, specify days of the week. Monday, can duplicate that, Tuesday and Wednesday. And then let's say we just keep these 3 columns here. So now we have a single row, and inside of that row we have 3 columns. And then we can specify another table row down here. And this time we have TD tags, which just mean that this is a normal table cell. So this is not a head cell, so it isn't printed in bold, I think. Instead, it's just a normal cell. So let's say we just want to enter some to-dos here for each weekday. Let's actually specify that here, put that in a div, and use an H2 again with my to-dos for the next week. Then we can use these TD tags to just enter any to-do, for example, here. So this is now the first field of the second row, where we can specify, for example, to feed the cat. We can duplicate this again, use the second field of the second row, for example, to go for a run, and to bring out the trash on Wednesday. And let's just do one more row, copy this tr tag, table row, and paste it down here. And whatever, swipe through Tinder, get some groceries, and I don't know, celebrate birthday. So that is now a table that looks a little bit more complex than what we did before. Just as a quick little recap, we just specified table attribute, which is just a container of the whole table. And inside of that table, we have tr tags for the single rows of the table. So for each row, we have one tr tag, one closing and opening and closing tag. Whoops. And inside of these tr tags, we have either th tags to print these texts in bold, to just mark the heading text, what this column is actually about, or we have td tags to specify a simple table cell. And if we now hit Ctrl S, you can see that it is a table. It's a very ugly table, but you can fix that later with CSS to actually make it look much better. And before we actually get to the last functional tag that I will show you in this crash course, I actually want to show you the so-called semantic tags or semantic HTML elements, which don't really give us additional functionality like displaying an image or showing a table. Instead, well, they are semantic elements. They are rather for good understanding. So, for example, this is the so-called nav tag, which we could put up here, which is just nav, and it behaves just like a div does, but it actually marks the content inside of it as our navigation bar. That's what it is for. So when we look over an HTML file and we see this nav tag, we immediately know, oh, okay, this must be the navigation bar. And we have a lot more of these, like, for example, header. We have the footer for just, well, the footer content, which could also theoretically just be a div, but footer just explains more what the content is actually about in it. We have a site, which is a sidebar in our website. We have a section, so just a section of content, of a little bit of text. And we have article, which, well, you can just define an article that you actually write or so. And I'm sure there are actually more than these, but just that you know that these semantic tags actually exist and what they are useful for. And I would really suggest you to use these instead of just usual divs when you actually make content where these fit you. So when you make a nav bar, use nav. When you make a footer, use footer, and a section, use section, and so on. You get what I mean here. So, okay, So the last part I want to show you here, or the last tag, is the form tag. With that we can actually, well, make forms on our website. For example, a simple registration form. And these are actually the most complicated tags here out of all these that we covered so far, but let's actually just start and you will see how this works. We again just start by specifying form, pressing enter, and you can see Visual Studio Code automatically includes this action attribute here. This is not really important right now to understand this, what it does, but essentially it will just make a network request to your server, or to a server in general. Because usually when you have a form, like a registration form, and the user hits submit, then you want to send the data to somewhere, usually to your server, to just register the user there. And here in that action attribute, you just specify the path to, or basically the route to where you actually want to post that data. But how this works will actually come at a later point when we get to JavaScript and actually to backend stuff. So you don't need to worry about this action for now. We just leave this empty here. And let's also wrap this into a div here with an h2, please register an account. And inside of this form tag, we can, for example, specify an input field. So we write input, and you can see this comes with the type attribute here, which is set to text by default. So if we now save this and take a look here at our website, it says, please register an account, and here is an empty input field. Now this input field here doesn't really tell the user what he should put in there. So what we need to do is we need to define a label for that field. So up here we use label, and we need to specify that label for a specific input. So let's say that will be the label email for the input field in which the user should enter his email. And in between this opening and closing label tag, we just put email. And now we specified for the label for which input field that actually should be, but we didn't specify that for the input field. Ooh, not again. We didn't specify that for the input field here, so we also need to do that. And we do this with the name attribute. So we just write name, press enter, and here we also type the exact same text as here. And when we now hit save, you can see now it describes to put in the email here in this input field. And you can also see this is the first time where the browser actually puts these elements next to each other and not below each other. So that is just a characteristic of this form attribute, that by default this label and all the attributes and all the elements we put in this form tag are actually placed next to each other. We could change this later with CSS, of course, but this is just the default behavior here. So let's just copy these two elements here, paste these down here, and let's just specify another input field for the password. Write password here. This label is for the password. You could choose whatever you like here. Important is just that you choose the same instead of this for attribute as you use in this name attribute here. And if we now hit Ctrl S, you can see there's another password text field here. And if we type something in here, you can see that is just plain text. We don't want that for a password input field. Instead, we want to hide what the user enters here. So we can just go over here and change this type of this password input field to password as well. And if we now hit save and enter something, you can see now we can't see it because it's a password field. And you have a lot more of these input tags, so a lot more types here you can choose from. What I will show you here also is, let's say, input, for example, a checkbox. So if let's duplicate that multiple times, hit Control S. No, I don't want to save that. Then you can see here are some checkboxes. We can check these. We can also just give these texts with these labels. And yeah, a checkbox is just, well, a checkbox, and we can check all of these or none of these. So it's basically multiple choice if you want so. Or you could also, well, choose none of these, as I said. Another type of these checkboxes are so-called radio buttons. We can change the type to radio. And these are buttons where you can only check one, and you have to check one. So now you can see these turned circular from square. And if we now click these, you can see that's just a normal radio button. But you can also see we can check all of these, and we can't uncheck these. And the reason for that is that we didn't specify these as a radio group. So we didn't really specify that these radio buttons belong together, and that we only want to be able to check one of these three. So let's see how that works. Let's first of all just give these labels for, let's say, male. Let's say that those are just radio buttons to check your gender. Specify male here. Copy this. Female. Female. And one last time for not sure. And not sure. Now hit save. You can now see they're just labels next to these radio buttons. And by the way, we again need to specify for these inputs as well that these belong to these labels. But for radio buttons, we actually use the value tag, because the name tag is used for something else, which you will see right afterwards. So in here, this is the radio button for male. So again, this must be the same as this. We copy this, paste it here and here, female and not sure. And then if we hit save, then nothing changed. You can see we again can choose all of these, but we actually only want to be able to choose one of these. And this is what we can actually achieve with a name attribute. So we can give all of these radio buttons the same name, for example, gender. And if all of these have the same name, the browser knows, okay, these must belong together. So if we hit save, now we can only choose one of these, as you can see. And that is exactly what we want here. And finally, we could just put in a button here. So just write button, press enter, and specify the text submit. And if we hit save, you can see the submit button appears here to just submit the whole form. So all these elements now belong to the same form for the registration form here. And these are by far not all the types of input fields you can have here. You can also have file inputs to upload files. I think you can also have color inputs to choose a color and so much more. But these were really the ones that are used the most. And if you understand one type of these, you can understand forms in general and how you can also apply other types of inputs here to your website. And that is everything I really wanted to show you in this course. Of course, this is not everything of HTML. There is a little bit more to it, but I really wanted to cover the basics here so that you can get started with web development and with CSS next. And you will learn everything else on the fly. And yeah, that is really everything you need to know to get started. That is the most important. Let's just have a quick little recap here and look over what we did. We specify an HTML file with this HTML tag. We have a head tag here, a head element with all these meta information tags. We can specify more of these if we want. We have a title tag which specifies the title of our website, so what appears in the tab bar. And then we have this body tag in which we put all the content of our website. So we have these containers called divs. We have headlines from H1 to H6 that just, well, define a heading We have paragraphs in which we can just put a lot of text we actually want the user to read. And here we have a break tag which just marks a line break. We have ordered lists, and we also had unordered lists. To specify these, you can just put these list items inside of li tags, and then the browser will do the rest with the bullet points and the numbering. We have these image tags to, well, display images, give them an alternative description here that shows up for screen readers, and if the image can't be loaded, I think we can specify width for these images as well. Then you've learned how you can specify such a table here. In this table we put tr tags for every row we want to have in that table, and in every row we either specify such an th tag or such an td tag for every column we want to have, for every cell in that specific row. Then you've also learned about these semantic HTML elements, which behave very similar to divs, but actually have a meaning, for example for navigation bars, for footers and so on, just to better understand an HTML file. And finally, I showed you how you can work with forms in HTML to make a registration form, a login form, a file input form. Well, I didn't show you how to make that, but in essence it's basically the same. All the time you want to submit some kind of data, you use these form tags, form elements, and instead of that you have input elements and labels that just describe these inputs. And that is really everything I wanted to show you in this crash course. Thank you for following through this along. I hope you understood everything well. If not, please ask your questions in the comments and we can help each other. I wish you an awesome day. Please tell me below what you think about this video. And yeah, I hope I'll see you in the next video again. Bye bye.